Racist manager called cops on black customer, unaware she is a CIA agent. Can a snap judgment change a life? What happens when prejudice pulls the trigger of injustice? Then, a simple shopping trip turns sour. A store manager's assumptions escalating into a call that would reveal a shocking truth. Aisha walked into the department store, the bright lights reflecting off the display of designer handbags she'd been admiring online. She was dressed casually, comfortable jeans and a simple t-shirt, but her eyes held a spark of excitement. Today was her day off, and she was treating herself. She'd been working hard, putting in long hours, and she deserved a little something special. She approached a sales associate, a young man named Kevin, who was busy rearranging a display of cologne. "Excuse me," Aisha said politely. "I'd like to see that handbag in the window, the burgundy one." Kevin barely looked up. "We're kind of busy right now," he mumbled, not making eye contact. "Maybe come back later?" Aisha was a little surprised. The store wasn't exactly packed. "I don't mind waiting," she said. "I just wanted to get a closer look." Kevin sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sigh. "Look," he said, leaning in conspiratorially, "I'm just going to be real with you. That bag is too expensive. Like really expensive. Are you sure you can afford it?" Aisha's jaw tightened. She knew what he was doing. It wasn't about the bag. It was about her. It was the way he looked at her, the subtle but unmistakable judgment in his eyes. "I assure you," she said, her voice even, "I can afford anything in this store." Kevin raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Right," he said. "Well, the bag's in the back. It might take a while to find it." He disappeared into a stockroom, leaving Aisha standing there, a knot of anger tightening in her stomach. Several minutes passed. Aisha stood there, fuming. She thought about leaving, but she was determined not to let Kevin's prejudice ruin her day. Finally, Kevin emerged from the stockroom, holding the handbag as if it were a hazardous material. He placed it on the counter in front of Aisha, avoiding her gaze. "Here you go," he said, his voice flat. Aisha picked up the bag, examining it carefully. It was exactly what she wanted. "I'll take it," she said, pulling out her credit card. Kevin's eyes widened slightly. He clearly hadn't expected her to actually buy it. As he rang up the purchase, he mumbled something under his breath. "Excuse me?" Aisha asked, her voice sharp. Kevin stammered. I said it's a nice bag." Aisha didn't believe him for a second. She knew he was still judging her, still making assumptions. She decided to take things up a notch. "Actually," she said, her voice rising slightly, "I'd like to speak to your manager." Kevin's face paled. "The manager? Why?" "Because," Aisha said, her voice now firm, "your sales associate has been incredibly rude and discriminatory." Kevin panicked. He knew he'd been out of line. He rushed to the back of the store and returned with a woman in a business suit. "This woman has a complaint," he mumbled, avoiding Aisha's eyes. The manager, Ms. Johnson, approached Aisha with a forced smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Is there a problem?" Aisha took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "Yes," she said. "Your sales associate made several inappropriate comments, implying I couldn't afford this handbag based on my appearance. It was a clear case of racial profiling." Ms. Johnson looked at Kevin, who was shifting nervously. "Is this true, Kevin?" she asked. Kevin denied it, of course. He claimed he had been nothing but helpful. Ms. Johnson looked back at Aisha, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She was about to dismiss the complaint when she noticed something. A small, discreet pin on Aisha's lapel. She leaned closer, her eyes widening. It was a miniature replica of the CIA seal. Suddenly, everything changed. The casual shopper was no longer just a customer. She was someone else entirely. Ms. Johnson's face went white. She had just insulted and dismissed a CIA agent. "Ma'am," she stammered, I had no idea." Aisha smiled, a cool, professional smile that sent chills down Ms. Johnson's spine. "That's quite all right," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "But I think we need to have a little chat in private." She gestured towards the back office. Ms. Johnson, her mind reeling, nodded silently and led the way. What would happen in that back office? What kind of trouble was Ms. Johnson in now? The back office was small and sparsely furnished, a stark contrast to the brightly lit, meticulously arranged store outside. Ms. Johnson, her face pale and drawn, closed the door behind them. Aisha remained standing, her posture relaxed, but radiating an air of quiet authority. She waited for Ms. Johnson to speak, but the manager seemed frozen, her mind clearly racing. "Ma'am," Ms. Johnson finally stammered, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea." Aisha raised a hand, cutting her off. "I understand," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Assumptions were made. Judgments were passed. And it's not the first time I've experienced this kind of misunderstanding." Ms. Johnson nodded, her eyes downcast. She knew what Aisha was referring to. She had seen it before, the subtle glances, the hushed whispers, the unspoken prejudices that lingered beneath the surface of polite society. She admitted to herself with a pang of guilt, been guilty of it herself on occasion. However, Aisha continued, her voice hardening slightly, "That doesn't excuse it. What happened out there was unacceptable, and it needs to be addressed." Ms. Johnson wrung her hands nervously. "Of course, ma'am. I'll speak to Kevin immediately. He'll be reprimanded. I assure you, this won't happen again." Aisha considered this for a moment. A reprimand? Was that really enough? She thought about all the times she had faced this kind of subtle discrimination, the way it chipped away at her confidence, the constant feeling of being judged, of being seen as less than. She had had enough. "I appreciate your offer," she said, her voice cool, "but I think this requires a bit more attention." Ms. Johnson's eyes widened. "What do you mean, ma'am?" Aisha reached in her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound wallet. She flipped it open, revealing a badge identical to the one on her lapel, but larger, more official-looking. It read, Central Intelligence Agency. Below it, her name, Aisha Carter. Ms. Johnson gasped, her eyes fixed on the badge. Everything clicked into place. The quiet confidence, the air of authority, the way she carried herself. This wasn't just any customer. She was a CIA agent. And Ms. Johnson, driven by her own biases, had just treated her like a common shoplifter. "Ms. Johnson," Aisha said, her voice now laced with steel, "I'm not just a customer. I'm an officer of the United States government. And what happened out there was not just rude. It was a violation of my civil rights." Ms. Johnson's face was ashen. She knew she was in serious trouble. "Ma'am," she stammered, I truly apologize. I didn't know." Aisha cut her off again. "Ignorance is no excuse, Ms. Johnson, especially not in this day and age. You made a judgment based on my appearance, and you treated me accordingly. That's not just bad customer service. It's discrimination, and it's something I will not tolerate." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now," she continued, her voice low and menacing, "I'm going to give you a choice. You can either handle this internally, and I'll walk out of here and never mention it again. Or," she paused again, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air, "or I can make a few phone calls, and this little incident will become very public. It will be on the news, in the papers, all over social media. Your store's reputation will be ruined. And you, Ms. Johnson, will be looking for a new job." Ms. Johnson's mind raced. She knew what Aisha was saying. She knew the power of the CIA, the influence they wielded. She knew that if this story got out, her store would be finished. She would be finished. She looked at Aisha, her eyes pleading. What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Aisha smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I think," she said, "we need to have a little talk about diversity training." Aisha leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. Ms. Johnson, still visibly shaken, sat opposite her, notepad and pen in hand, ready to take notes. The tension in the small office was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Ms. Johnson," Aisha began, her voice calm and measured, "this isn't just about Kevin. It's about the culture of this store, and frankly, about the culture of our society. It's about the unconscious biases that we all carry, the assumptions we make based on appearances, on race, on gender, on anything that makes someone different from us." Ms. Johnson nodded, her eyes fixed on her notepad. She knew Aisha was right. She had seen it herself. The subtle ways in which customers were treated differently, the way certain employees were given preferential treatment, the way the store's marketing materials often featured only one type of person. "Diversity training," Aisha continued, isn't just about checking a box. It's about creating a real understanding, a genuine respect for all people, regardless of their background. It's about recognizing our own biases and learning how to overcome them. She paused, looking directly at Ms. Johnson. I want you to implement a comprehensive diversity training program for all your employees. I want it to be mandatory, and I want it to be more than just a one-day seminar. I want it to be an ongoing process, something that's integrated into the fabric of this store. Ms. Johnson nodded eagerly. Of course, ma'am. I'll get right on it. I'll find a reputable program, and we'll start the training as soon as possible. Aisha smiled, a genuine smile this time. I appreciate that, Ms. Johnson, but I also want you to be involved. I want you to participate in the training alongside your employees. And I want you to take it seriously. Ms. Johnson's smile faltered slightly. Me? But ma'am, Aisha raised an eyebrow. Is there a problem? Ms. Johnson stammered. No, ma'am. Of course not. I'll participate. Good, Aisha said. Because this isn't just about your employees. It's about you too, Ms. Johnson. It's about all of us. We all have biases, and we all need to work to overcome them. She stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. I'll be in touch, she said. I want to see the details of the training program, and I'll be following up to make sure it's being implemented properly. Ms. Johnson nodded, standing up as well. Of course, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Aisha turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Ms. Johnson, she said, her voice now playful. One more thing. Ms. Johnson turned back, her eyes wide. That burgundy handbag, Aisha said. I'll take it. And I expect a discount. Ms. Johnson smiled weakly. Of course, ma'am. Anything you want. Aisha smiled back. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. I look forward to seeing the changes you make. She left the office, leaving Ms. Johnson standing there, a whirlwind of thoughts swirling in her mind. She knew Aisha was right. She knew things had to change. She knew that if she wanted her store to survive, she had to address the issues of diversity and inclusion. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. Kevin, she said, her voice firm, I need to see you in my office. Now. What would happen to Kevin? What changes would Ms. Johnson implement? And would the store and its customers ever be the same? This story highlights the pervasiveness of unconscious bias and the importance of addressing it. It demonstrates how seemingly small acts of prejudice can have a significant impact and emphasizes the need for accountability. It also showcases the power of speaking up against injustice and using one's position to create positive change. Finally, it reminds us that everyone, regardless of their background, deserves to be treated with respect and dignity. What do you think of Aisha's approach? Have you ever experienced or witnessed similar situations? Share your thoughts in the comments below.